Texans pause to remember members of the U.S. military who gave their all in service to their country. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this Memorial Day.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio. I'm David Brown. Hope you're having a meaningful and memorable Memorial Day. Across Texas, observances and events are scheduled. Meanwhile, voters in the Lone Star State are making their lists and checking them twice with primary runoff day set for tomorrow. We'll get you up to speed on the statewide races to watch. Plus, we'll hear about a new way to help folks who want to get away to one of the state's parks, how to get an edge on discovering some of Texas's natural crown jewels and some less well-known spots, too. All that and a whole lot more today on the Texas Standard. No matter where you are, it's Memorial Day, and many Texans taking a time out to honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice while serving in the U.S. military. It's Texas Standard Time on this 25th day of May, 2026, Memorial Day in Texas. I'm David Brown. Great to have you with us, and thanks for spending a bit of this day with us. We hope you'll find a time well spent, especially as tomorrow is also a red-letter day on the political calendar in Texas. You'll remember that back in March, Texans set new records for turnout at the primaries, a sign of how much excitement there is about the upcoming midterms and what's at stake in November. Well, tomorrow, when Texans go to the polls in the last day of voting in the primary runoffs, barring any logistical surprises, a total of 38 party nomination contests will be settled, because the candidates in those races didn't get more than 50% of the vote during the March primary. That will work out tomorrow, we believe. In terms of statewide runoffs, there are 2 Democratic and 4 Republican statewide races. They include a Republican contest for U.S. Senator, Republican and Democratic runoffs for Attorney General, a Democratic runoff for Lieutenant Governor, and a Republican runoff for Railroad Commissioner. That's a seat on the commission that regulates the oil and gas industries. There's also a runoff for the Republican nomination for District 3 on the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. But when the dust all settles, we'll have a much more clearly defined picture of the layout for the November midterm general election ballot in Texas. Now, if you didn't cast your ballot in early voting, are you ready for tomorrow? Here to get you there, we have 2 veteran politics watchers to let you know what to expect on voting day and what to watch for when returns come in Tuesday night. In one corner, Blaze Gainey, who covers politics for the Texas Newsroom. Blaze, great to have you, and thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
And we also have Lauren McGaughy with us. She's a veteran of the Texas Newsroom. These days, she reports on Texas for the New York Times. Lauren, welcome back.
Glad to be back.
Blaze, let's begin with you. What do people need to bring to vote, and how can they find their polling place? That basic stuff.
Yeah, essentially they just need to have a government ID with their picture on it. That's a driver's license, handgun license, military photo ID, something given to them by the government so that it can be official. And then for finding their polling place, they just need to check with their local election office. They can go on the website, type in their address. And also, it probably wouldn't hurt, just because of some things that happened last time, to also double check with the Secretary of State's website. If those aren't lining up, I would say just call over. But ultimately, it should be pretty simple.
Lauren, remind us who's eligible to vote in these runoffs. Do you have to have voted in the primary, or can any registered voter cast a ballot?
You do not have to have voted in the primary. As long as you're registered, you can go in and cast a ballot. If you didn't vote in the primary, you could then vote for either on the Republican side or the Democrat side. If you did vote in the primary, you have to stick to the party that you voted for in the primary. So say you voted for the Democratic ticket in March, that means you would come back in and vote for the Democrats again.
You anticipated what I was going to ask there, because I know a lot of people think that some people harbor a hope that they can tilt the balance for their own party by voting in the other primary runoff on certain seats, but bit hard to do. Let's talk about the biggest race on either ballot. That's got to be the U.S. Senate primary on the Republican side. With President Trump's endorsement of Ken Paxton last week in the U.S. Senate primary runoff, I guess a lot of pundits seem to be thinking that may have been fatal to John Cornyn's chances for a 5th term in the Senate. What are you hearing, Blaze?
He was expected to lose. This is a runoff, and usually runoff is dominated by the most extreme part of the party just because less people are voting. So
when you say
leans
he was
towards
expected to
Paxton.
lose, you mean John Cornyn was expected to lose against Ken Paxton?
That's correct. That's what the polls showed, at least. Not saying he had no chance, but now this Trump endorsement essentially sort of means that.
This seems to have gotten particularly nasty with TV ads, Lauren. Did it seem particularly pointed to you?
It really was. This is one of the most expensive and also the most aggressive matchups in the country. We saw the candidates really going after each other personally and professionally, just hammering each other over and over in TV ads. And just to echo something that Blaze said, the only question mark in this race was the president's support. And even though it came very late for Ken Paxton, he's acting as though that has already kind of won him the race. He's moved on from this and is already attacking James Tallarico, the Democrat. But, it's not over. We have to see what happens tomorrow. And Mr. Cornyn has been in the Senate for a long time, and he's had a lot of funding. And so we're going to have to see whether his long career can carry him through to a win, even against the president's wishes.
Well, I guess part of what has made this race so interesting to watch is this idea that James Tallarico has a sort of a different challenge ahead of him, depending on whether it's Cornyn or Paxton. I've just boiled this down to the way that a lot of people term this. What are the chances that Tallarico has against, say, Paxton versus if he has to run against John Cornyn? What's the conventional wisdom there? Blaze, what are you hearing?
I think against Paxton, they believe he has a better chance. That's what all the polls show, but not like a large difference. Essentially, he has a good chance against either candidate, but against Paxton, there's at least some things there that's easy to attack. Although we've already seen those attacks for over a year now from Cornyn's campaign, so not really sure how much more of that we need to see.
Lauren, I know you've been covering Paxton and the AG's office for some time. Perhaps we should shift gears there to this race for the AG's office. A runoff there on both sides of the aisle, I believe?
Yeah, that's right. This is a really critical office to Texans. It's the state's lawyer, so it defends the state in court when it's sued. And Paxton, over his decade in the office, he also made it more of an aggressive, outward-looking, proactive agency, attacking Democratic policies coming out of the White House and supporting President Trump's policy goals. So it's become, it was already an important agency and has been made kind of a national agency under Paxton. And it's wide open now to see who's going to actually fulfill that role going forward.
Blaze, let's shift gears to this Railroad Commission contest. The Railroad Commission, as most folks know, deals with energy regulation in Texas. Some headlines on the Republican side. Tell us more about that race and why it's so significant.
Yeah, it's actually not a race that usually makes headlines, but Beau French, the candidate that's running against Jim Wright, the incumbent, he's made sure that this has been in the headlines by saying things that don't necessarily have to do with the energy industry at all, but just really Republican hot button topics. I'm talking anti-Muslim things, and he's said these things and it gets talked about. And then even Jim Wright himself has said this isn't really something that he likes to talk about. He doesn't really know much about DEI, and I think Beau French has sort of shifted what this race is really about. It's about sort of how MAGA are you, when really it's just to be about regulating energy in the state. So
and I guess by extension, it's sort of the character of the Republican Party in Texas moving forward. No.
It could indicate that. I mean, we'll have to wait to see exactly who wins, but it looks as though, once again, given it's a runoff, Beau French has somewhat of an advantage.
Lauren, is that the way you see it?
Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of polling in this race. One of the few polls showed Jim Wright ahead by almost 10 points, but then there were like 30% or something of voters who hadn't made up their minds. This isn't a position, like Blaze said, that many people are very familiar with. But again, like Attorney General, it's vitally important. Texas produces more than 40% of the nation's crude oil and also a good bit of our natural gas in this country. And And as the market has been so shocked by the Iran war, the individuals regulating that industry, have control over a vital piece of the American energy independence portfolio. And so Jim Wright has tried to make the case that you need someone with an even hand who's going to pay attention to the core issues of the job. And Beau French has said, I got all that handled, but also I'm as MAGA as they can come. And so you should throw your vote my way. It's a real litmus test.
Lauren, I want to ask you, because you've recently shifted gears from reporting for local news organizations for quite some time, including the Texas Newsroom, now with the New York Times. And I'm curious how you think about talking about what's happening in this primary runoff to a national audience.
Yeah.
How much do you think people someplace like New York or California or even D.C. are looking at these primary runoffs in Texas? Any real interest?
Oh, a lot of interest. We've seen very high readership across the country from our stories out of Texas. And, we don't usually write about the Railroad Commission race. We did this year. And a lot of people read that story, and you make the case that, reminding people that these are important jobs, even though they may not have heard of them, and not just to us here in Texas, but because of their connection to the Trump administration, because of their connection to energy, they affect all Americans in some way. So, we're seeing people's eyes trained on Texas this year. It is a much more unpredictable electoral situation than we've had really in the whole past decade. And there's a lot of open questions, more so than I've seen in my time here. And so people are really eager to see how this all susses out tomorrow.
Blaze, we're down to our final minute here, but 18 million registered voters. Turnout in runoff elections historically lags behind participation in the primaries themselves, but participation this past March especially strong. Any clues how much Texans are plugged into these runoffs?
I don't have any clues yet, but I will say I have not seen many lines or many people walking in and out of polling places when I pass by.
Early voting. Yeah.
Exactly, for early voting. But I do think a lot of what we saw in the primary was carried by the Senate race on the Democratic side. So I'm not sure that we'll see a large turnout in the runoff.
Well, we'll have to wait and find out tomorrow. We've been talking with Blaze Gainey, who covers politics for the Texas Newsroom, Lauren McGaughy, who reports for the New York Times. Thank you both so much. Certainly do appreciate you sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Hey, there's a whole lot more of the Texas Standard just ahead. Don't touch that dial. Coming up on 19 minutes past the hour Texas Standard Time.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the online UT High School, offering a full-time diploma program for remote, asynchronous learners throughout Texas. More at highschool.utexas.edu/tuition-free. Support for Texas Standard comes from Good Spread, an Austin-based mineral sunscreen brand seeking to make clean, reef-safe SPF for every body under the sun. Now at H-E-B stores across Texas. More at goodspreadsuncare.com.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. A new free app from Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation aims to make native gardening a lot less intimidating for many Texans and a lot more helpful for pollinators. It's called Wild Thumb, and its goal is to help Texans with planting and caring for drought-tolerant native plants that help struggling pollinators like native bees and butterflies. It's all part of a broader Pollinators and Prairies initiative from Texas Parks and Wildlife. Julie Shaddix is Director of Development and Conservation's programs at Texas Parks and Wildlife, and we spoke with her about this new app back in February. For those who don't know or haven't heard of it before, tell us a little bit more about this Pollinators and Prairies program.
Yeah, so Pollinators and Prairies works to increase the quality and quantity of pollinator and grassland habitat in the state of Texas. People may not realize this, but grassland habitat, which is also called prairie, is the #1 most endangered habitat type in North America.
Really?
Yes, and as much as 98% of Texas's historic tallgrass prairie no longer exists. And, pollinators, that's the habitat that pollinators need, right? And so when that habitat declines, you see declines in pollinator species, and then that sort of feeds back in, since they're pollinating the grassland species, that feeds back into the decline of native grasses, native plants, wildflowers, and all of that. So that creates a lot of problems for the ecosystem as a whole.
Well, so how would an app help solve that problem? Could you explain what this Wild Thumb app is supposed to do?
Yeah, so one of the strategies that Pollinators and Prairies uses to increase that pollinator habitat is to educate and engage everyday Texans in the small actions that we can all take to make a difference for pollinators. And so one of the things that anyone can do is use more native plants or plant, native plants in your landscaping, in your yard, in your garden. And so Wild Thumb aims to make that much easier for people to do by helping people select the appropriate native plants for their space and be successful growing those plants.
Okay, I've gone to wildthumb.org here on my browser, and I see it's actually a beautiful, very straightforward web page, and it says the only native planting app made just for Texas. Let's grow wild. Tell us what actually happens once you download the app and you click through it. How does it make plant recommendations?
Yeah, so users enter their zip code, and from your zip code, you learn what ecoregion you're in. And your ecoregion guides the plant recommendations. So which plants are either native to your ecoregion or adapted to your ecoregion, so they'll grow well. And then you also answer some questions about the type of space that you'd like to plant in. So roughly what size is the bed, or you can even do potted plants on your porch. How many pots do you want to do? And is it full sun, part sun? Roughly about how much light do you have? You don't have to get crazy with measuring it. And then from there, once the app knows, where you are and what your space is like, then it recommends native plants that will grow well in that space.
I have a lot of friends who are green thumbs. They know what they're doing. I don't. How far does the app go in helping you actually nurture these plants, help them actually grow once you've got the seed in the ground?
Yeah, so the app has a directory of nurseries that sell native plants, which we're always trying to grow that directory, as well as seed providers if you want to do like a seed mix for a pocket prairie, which is more, like an assemblage of grasses and wildflowers versus, individual plants that you're planting in specific locations. And so the app will guide you through where you can purchase the native plants. And then it does give simple instructions for how to plant the plants, or if you need to remove some existing vegetation, how you can do that. And we try to keep everything really simple because, of course, there are, master gardeners out there, people that know, a lot about gardening, but you don't have to know that much just to get started, right? And so, of course, experts can use the app, but we try to make it very simple for beginners to just get out there and, put a couple native plants in their yards.
One other quick question, because I was kind of struck by the fact that Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation was doing something like this. I don't generally associate you folks with app development. Have you done this before?
No, so this is our very first app, and it was new and very exciting territory for us.
Well, it certainly does look like it's exciting, and it's free, right? So anyone can download it, and you don't have to have an iPhone. You can have an Android device, too, it looks like.
Correct. It's free, and it's available for iPhone, Android, and iPad.
That is awesome. I'm going to check it out. Wild Thumb is available now. It can be downloaded for free in the Apple App Store, Google Play. Julie Shaddocks has been telling us all about it. She's Director of Development and Conservations Programs at the Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation. Julie, thanks so much for joining us on The Standard.
Thank you so much for having me.
Support for Texas Standard comes from TrialMed, conducting clinical research for over 30 years. Info on current trials in Texas at trialmed.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. For some, snorkeling in a partially submerged cave is the stuff of nightmares. But for John Moretti, it's just another day at the office. Moretti is a paleontologist at the University of Texas, and in an underground Comal County passageway, he recently discovered fossils from lion-sized animals dating back to the Ice Age. This discovery disproves some previous theories about what species called Texas home back in the ancient era, and it sparked renewed conversation about what's left to learn from Texas fossils. We spoke with John in April. You know, I don't know where to begin with this. Do we start with the lion-sized armadillo, or do we go with what you were doing in a cave in Comal County with a snorkel on? Let's begin there. How about that? Or did you have a sense that this cavern you were heading into would yield lots of fossils?
I really had no idea. You know, I came out to this cave because my friend and co-author on this recent paper, John Young, he was a regional caver, well-respected, well-known. He was exploring this cave with the permission of the landowners and started finding bone after bone. And really, I went out there to kind of placate him, to stop this stream of text message fossil photos.
You won't believe what I found.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Right? Yeah. So I said, fine, I'll come on out there. I didn't expect it to be anything really different at all. I didn't even expect the cave to be different until the day before when I texted John to say, hey, we're still on for tomorrow. And he said, yeah, sure thing. Just don't forget your snorkel, your dive mask, and your wetsuit. It was at that point that I realized, oh boy, I'm in for something different here.
This was going to be something different. So once you got out there, what did you find? What was it like?
So we have to rappel down inside a narrow sinkhole, down about 30, 35 feet. Mm-hmm. And that allows us to enter then a horizontal tunnel-like passageway, like you said, halfway filled with a flowing stream of water.
I was going to ask. Yeah, right. Well, what's that water from? One of the popular rivers down there or something?
It's actually, this water feeds into one of our rivers. It feeds into the Guadalupe River system, actually. Right. So this is groundwater. This is water in our limestone bedrock that is draining out into this cave, and it moves. It's flowing through this cave system, and when it reaches the surface, we would call it spring water. Okay. It's coming out of the ground as a spring water.
How
so
deep
we're behind
were
the
you?
scenes there.
How deep were you?
We're only about 30, 40 feet below the surface. Not terribly far down under our feet.
So you make your way through this. Are you seeing things in the walls? Or are you finding it on the bed or what?
That's just it. In most caves, we find fossils by excavating through layers of dirt. And it takes a long time to find a fossil. It takes a lot of work to find a fossil. But here in this cave, all we had to do was put on our dive mask and our snorkel and put our head underwater.
And it's just all around you?
It's everywhere.
Holy cow.
The bed of this stream is just littered with fossils of Ice Age megafauna. Things like mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, even saber-toothed cats. They're just laying there, and we can pluck them up from the stream bed where they've been resting probably for millennia.
Was this the discovery of a new place or for finding fossils altogether? Or what? Did you know that you probably have a mother lode down here?
Actually, cavers, like my colleague John Young, knew there were fossils here. They've known for decades. And they actually told other paleontologists, some of my predecessors here at UT actually, about it. But the challenges of working in this environment, these cold subterranean places, this cold water, and the challenge of interpreting the fossils in these environments really prevented anybody else from ever wanting to try to study it.
Well, this was privately held land too, right? You had to get permission from the folks who owned it.
That's a key part of the whole thing, right? If we want to study fossils in Texas, most of the fossils we are interested in are preserved on private land, right? That's most of Texas. And so the only way this science gets done is through a kind of partnership between scientists like me, often avocational folks like these cavers, and private landowners.
Okay, let's get back to that relative of the armadillo that was lion-sized. That sounds surreal. Tell me about what you actually found.
So what we actually found in the cave are pieces of the armored shell of this armadillo-like animal. If you saw this thing alive, you would think, hey, That's an armadillo. The big difference would be this animal is about 6 to 7 feet long and about 3.5 feet tall at the back of its shell. Much larger than our living armadillo. This animal is fairly common in fossil sites along the Gulf Coast of Texas and in Florida. But as you get further north, anywhere in the U.S., they become pretty darn rare. Mm-hmm. And here on the Edwards Plateau, they'd never been found before. Despite 100 years, over 100 years of paleontological research in regional caves.
Wow. Well, this gets us back to what I was saying earlier about how this is re-stimulating a conversation around what kind of animals may have populated Texas back during the Ice Age. Is that right?
That's correct. So we know a lot about the Ice Age in Texas and here in Central Texas specifically. And we know that because of predecessors, people like me, who were studying fossils, often in caves or river drainages or other places. And here on the Edwards Plateau of Central Texas, we'd never found these giant armadillo-like pamphotheres before. That always made sense because these animals, we think, needed a relatively warm, humid, sort of tropical climate to live. Mm-hmm. And our understanding of the last 20,000 years of the Ice Age here in Texas was that it was pretty cool, pretty dry, except along the Gulf Coast.
So how do you see this changing the narrative?
Well, first of all, it just shows that there are still animals, giant animals, out there in this region's past that we've never found before.
Maybe we're making assumptions, false assumptions about the climate, perhaps?
Well, okay, that's really exciting there. No, I don't think so. I think our understanding of the last 20,000 years of the Ice Age and the animal community, the climate, the habitats of this region are correct. They're based on good data. But the climate, the animal community, the environments of Texas were not static throughout the entire 2 million years of the Ice Age. These animals that we're finding in this cave, in this underground stream, they hint that the animal community in the Ice Age is actually changing alongside changes in the environment and changes in climate. They're changing where they live in the United States, these animals, and they're doing that prior to the end of the Ice Age animal community altogether, before these animals go extinct.
Have you published these findings anywhere or no?
That's really what prompted our conversation, is a new paper we have out describing just these ideas, the discovery of these fossils and what they mean.
I'm wondering if it might be possible for you to share some pictures with us and then we could share it with listeners on our website, texasstandard.org.
I'd love to.
That's fantastic. And that's also the place where you'll find an extended version of this conversation with our guest, John Moretti. He's a paleontologist at the University of Texas. Fascinating stuff. You did a lovely job explaining it to someone like me, too. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, David.
There's a whole lot more of the Texas Standard just ahead. Don't touch that dial.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' compensation provider that's been caring for hardworking Texans for over 30 years. More at texasmutual.com/expert partner. Support for Texas Standard comes from Half Price Books, a Texas-bred new and used bookstore, proudly supporting public media and sustainability by keeping books, music, and other media in circulation. Store locations and more information at hpb.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. From Big Bend to Caddo Lake and Padre Island to Palo Duro, Texas has no shortage of public lands. Even in a state that's about 95% privately owned, the options to get outside are quite diverse, offering ecosystems to explore of all sorts. But the path to conserve that land wasn't simple. In her new book, Wild Women for Good, author Jennifer Bristol documents the role female Texans played in shaping the state's conservation and public preservation efforts. Jennifer joined us in the Texas Standard Studios in April. What inspired you to tell this story through this overlooked lens?
Well, I have to be honest, the genesis for the story came from my mom, who really wanted a book like this. Didn't think I would write it, but she had the idea all the way back in 2009. And then finally in 2019, we kept kicking the idea around. We said, let's do this. You know, we really we kind of had put together enough information about some women, some foundational women as well as contemporary women, and we just decided to go for it.
Was she involved in conservation efforts herself?
Very much so. My mother is Valerie Bristol, and she was a former county commissioner here in Austin and Travis County, and helped set aside the Balcony Canyon lands for 8 different endangered species, but specifically the golden cheek warbler.
Well, you write about how when you were working on this book, you would stumble across signs in parks and that sort of thing that would denote the impact of some of the people that you write about, and also how little documentation there was at times for some of the work of these women. Say a little bit more about those challenges that you found in writing this book.
Sure. It was a challenge, definitely, to find some on a lot of these women who were really in the background. Thankfully, there's all kinds of archives around the state of Texas, and those archive librarians are amazing at digging in and helping us find different letters and documents. And then I reached out to some of the family members too, who were wonderful to share, some of those really expressive letters about what they were doing and really the point in time that they were doing it in. And then some of the bigger women, Lady Bird Johnson,
obviously,
former First Lady Laura Bush, there's plenty written about them.
But I think this might speak to a larger issue about how we're documenting what's being done. And I'm wondering, perhaps you can share a story that might have been lost were it not for your work. You have an example?
Sure. So there was a woman who lived here in Austin. Her name was May Powell. Mm-hmm. And she was the secret weapon for getting the first State Parks Board solidified, but also the passage of the legislation that was needed to accept those first 23 parks into the system. And
why do you say secret weapon?
Because she was the one that showed up, and she would be down at the Capitol meeting with people. She hosted parties, she brought people together, and she really pushed for it. And she understood the politics and the nuances that needed to happen to get people more favorable towards the idea, because they weren't at first.
I think that a lot of people feel like, well, they're passionate about something like conservation or preservation, but they feel like they don't have the connections, they don't have the money, they don't have the background that would empower them to make a difference. But what this sort of seems to be suggesting is that the willingness to show up, the willingness to be there, to do it where others haven't. It's all about just basically taking that initiative.
And that was something that really came across in either the interviews or even the research that we were doing, was it's all about what's right for you, what's scalable for you. I hope that as people read these stories, they see themselves in them and say, gosh, she stepped forward and she had kids and aging parents and work and, everything else. Why can't I? And so hopefully they'll feel inspired to, step up and do something, again, that's scalable for them.
And what about your passions? Like mother, like daughter? Is that
like
what happened?
Like mother, like daughter, and like father.
Oh, is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I worked for Texas Parks and Wildlife for 10 years, and I currently serve for the city of Austin as the chair of the Environmental Commission. So, and my passion is bird-friendly design, designing buildings that prevent bird strikes and bird collisions.
That's really interesting. That's I think about where the spark comes for young people to get engaged, get involved, and Texas has changed a lot. I have a sense that as much as people really enjoy Texas's park system and getting out there, that fewer of us are actually doing it. And I'm wondering how concerned you are about the future of conservation here.
I'm concerned, but also excited at the same time.
Oh, say more about that.
Yeah, I think there's an awareness that we really have to do something, that we have to step forward, and that it takes all of us to be involved if we want to have more parks, if we want to conserve the land that we all share. I think there's a lack of awareness of what to do and how to do it. And so I think, hopefully that will be something that as young people step forward, that they can learn more about and figure out how to organize. I think there's an amazing opportunity in the nonprofit world right now, especially for women.
Especially for
women to step forward and have those leadership roles in the conservation world. That is something where as soon as a lot of these nonprofits sort of came about, they immediately started funneling into and have been great leaders in that. Instead of the traditional ways of working for Texas Parks and Wildlife or U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Forest Service, those sort of traditional tracks.
When you step back and you think about, you have a comprehensive account of women's role in Texas conservation. What does it tell you about the future of environmentalism more broadly in Texas?
Yeah, so, I would love to see more being done. Texas it's a tough state. I'm a proud Texan, but sometimes it's hard to be a Texan at the same time, especially when we're talking about our environment. I think we have a lot of threats, to us right now. We have, data centers coming left and right.
Let me pause. Let me ask you to pause for just a moment, because I sometimes wonder whether there is something about, historically speaking, thinking of nature from an adversarial perspective. In a way, we're sort of trying to overcome these forces of nature that sometimes can seem insurmountable, and that being part of the mythology of Texas, baked into, in a way, the story of Texas, right? I wonder if, in a way, that adversarial posture has affected the way that we think about conservation.
Absolutely. I mean, we've always had so much land and in abundance. We haven't really had to stop and think about it quite as, maybe intensely as some of the, other states have. So that has given us this sort of right, if you will, the feeling that we can do as we want when we want. And then, of course, as we're settling Texas or anywhere, any human settling anything, there's this need to have dominion over it in order to put order, into that. So I think that all plays in there. Certainly our own Texas history of, we are a land-rich state and we are going to build on it, whatever we want to build.
But you are optimistic,
laws,
nonetheless.
Yeah, our laws, really give us that right as well. But I am optimistic. I think there's more awareness than ever that, especially when it comes to water, that we have to really start looking very carefully about how we're using our resources.
Jennifer Bristol is a Texas author, and her new book is Wild Women for Good. Very interesting read. Congratulations. And we're going to have more at texasstandard.org so you can dig in a little bit deeper. Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Casa. For a child in foster care, small moments today can have a big impact tomorrow. More on how lending time and support can help make a difference at becomeacasa.org.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. Voters across Texas who did not already vote early will be headed to the polls tomorrow for the state's primary runoff elections. Earlier in the program, we got a preview of some of the big statewide races, but now we turn our attention to some U.S. House seats in Texas that are still up for grabs by their respective parties. Of course, the winners of these runoffs will be on the ballot in November, the first general election since the Texas legislature redrew the state's congressional maps. Here to help us break down some key races is Andrew Schneider, senior reporter on politics and government at Houston Public Media. Andrew, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
And Gabby Birnbaum, Washington correspondent for the Texas Tribune. Gabby, thank you so much for being here.
Excited to be here.
Well, Gabby, let me start with you. How much overall has Texas's much changed congressional map affected the number and kinds of runoff contests that we're seeing now across the state?
Because of redistricting, we saw more retirements, I think, than we typically would. And then because we have seats that are now newly Republican leaning, we have, more open races. And when there's more open races, there's not an incumbent in the race or someone who's as well known. Then sometimes that leads to runoffs because nobody got a decisive majority in the first round. And then you also had incumbents drawn into the same district. So you can, follow all those threads there. That's why we have more congressional runoffs.
Andrew, let's start in Houston, where you are. Several districts have been upended by the new maps. Democrat Al Green was drawn out of the 9th district, where he served in Congress for years, and now he's in a runoff with Christian Menifee in the 18th district. How is that race shaping up?
Yeah, the race is shaping up as sort of a generational battle. Menifee is in his late 30s, Al Green is in his late 70s, and this is a district that it lost two sitting representatives who were in their 70s, younger than Green, in recent years. And that left the district without representation at some key moments of the Trump presidency. Green is surprisingly, is the underdog in this race, according to most polling. Then you have over in the ninth, you've got a Republican runoff between former Harris County Judge candidate Alex Mueller, who is endorsed by President Trump, and a number of other local figures in the Republican Party, facing off against State Representative Briscoe Cain, who was endorsed by Governor Abbott. And in that one, Mueller appears to be the leading, according to most polling.
Well, Gabby, let's move to North Texas and District 33, where Colin Allred and Julie Johnson, another pair of Democrats, are facing off. Allred is newer to this district in the race, though they've both served in Congress. How is that shaping up?
Yeah, this is a pretty rare matchup where you have an active member, Julie Johnson, facing her direct predecessor, Colin Allred, right? Johnson currently represents and Allred did represent the old 32nd district. That got totally chopped up and redistricting and extended out to East Texas to make it red. Now you've got a seat in Dallas County that's about a third of what was Johnson and Allred's district. So you've got 2/3 of the voters there are coming from different congressional districts in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And it's gotten to be a pretty contentious race. Allred has attacked Johnson over her stock trading portfolio. Johnson has attacked Allred for votes he took when he was running for Senate that were more moderate, especially on an immigration bill. And that's a race where we don't expect turnout to be super high. So those votes there are really going to matter for who's going to represent that seat moving forward.
Well, Andrew, back to Harris County, but a different district, the 38th this time, and we're going to focus in on the Republican side. John Bonk was endorsed by President Trump in his race against Shelley DeZevelos. Is this endorsement even more important given recent victories by Trump allies around the country?
I'd say it is. He also carries the endorsement of Senator Cruz. And as far as federal races across Texas go, those are the two big endorsements that you want if you're a Republican. Trump is coming off a spate of successful endorsements. And it's worth remembering that John Bonk came very close to winning outright in the March primary against Shelley DeZevelos. So it's more than likely that a Trump endorsement, and which came relatively early in the process, could put him over the top.
Gabby, let's move out to West Texas, the 19th district, which really stretches from Lubbock to Abilene. Tom Sell and Abraham Enriquez are both first-time pro-Trump Republican candidates, and they've offered very similar stances on issues. Do either of them appear to have an edge in this race?
Yeah, I mean, Tom Sell definitely got a much higher percentage of the vote in the primary, and he's gotten a lot of ad support in the runoff from outside groups that are playing there on his behalf. So, his allies have way outspent Enriquez's campaign, and I would definitely expect Tom Sell to sort of be in the driver's seat for that one. But runoff electorate, so you never quite know.
Well, let's go to the 35th district in Central Texas, where we've got runoffs on both sides of the aisle. It's another district that was redrawn in an effort to get out a Democratic incumbent, Greg Casar, who's now running in the 37th. Andrew, do you want to tell us about the Democrats now running in the 35th?
Right. This is kind of a contentious race in large part because one of the remaining Democratic candidates, Maureen Galindo, she's a housing advocate and sex therapist, has made quite a few anti-Semitic comments that have drawn national media coverage. She had posted on Instagram that she wanted to turn ICE detention centers into, quote, a prison for American Zionists. She said that her opponent, Bexar County Deputy Sheriff Johnny Garcia, and, quote, anyone supported by Israel should be tried for treason. And she has been basically rebuked and disowned by a lot of the leaders in the state and county Democratic parties. And Democratic Senate nominee James Tallarico said that if she wins the nomination, he won't campaign for her. There have even been a few sitting members of Congress that said if she wins the nomination and goes on to win the election, they'll move to have her expelled immediately.
How about on the Republican side of that race in the 35th, Gabby?
Yeah, that's another interesting one. You've got State Rep John Lujan, who's no stranger to Bexar County. He's won a seat that, Joe Biden won in 2020 multiple times. He finished first in the primary, but then you have Carlos de la Cruz. He's a veteran. He's the brother of Monica de la Cruz, who's a Republican congresswoman from South Texas, from Edinburgh. And Carlos is sort of a political newcomer, but he got the Trump endorsement, and then he's also been backed by a big AI PAC that's been spending money on his behalf. So again, you sort of pro-De La Cruz forces, mostly AI, have outspent pro-Lujan forces, but that was, a pretty small electorate in the primary to begin with. So that's going to be one in a smaller electorate. We'll see if, the Trump endorsement sort of brings De La Cruz over the top, or if Lujan's, history in the district and having been elected official wins the day.
The primary runoff election is tomorrow. Gabby Birnbaum is the Texas Tribune's Washington correspondent, and Andrew Schneider covers politics for Houston Public Media. Thank you both so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
We're out of time on this Memorial Day, but you can keep up with us 24/7 at texasstandard.org. And be sure to tune in tomorrow as we check back on Election Day in Texas, and then again on Wednesday when we'll have a full recap of the runoffs. See you back here tomorrow.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family.